The laughter in the Silver Creek Saloon stopped all at once when Caleb Stone stood up from the bar and said the words no one expected to hear. "I'll take the hand." Every head turned. The smoky air hung still, and the trembling young woman standing beside the drifter looked at Caleb like she wasn't sure if he had just saved her life or made it worse. Men whispered that Caleb had finally lost his mind. Others shook their heads and said he'd just won the most worthless prize in the Montana Territory. But Caleb didn't care what they said. Something in the woman's eyes stopped him cold. She looked like someone waiting to see whether the world would show her mercy or crush her one more time. 3 days earlier, Caleb had stood at the edge of his homestead, staring at the land that had broken him year after year. The stubborn Montana soil gave him just enough to survive, never enough to live. Behind the cabin stood the graves of his wife, Sarah, and the infant son he never got to hold. For 7 years, he'd talked to those graves every Sunday, trying to keep going, trying to believe his life still had meaning. That night at the saloon, the only thing Caleb wanted was a quiet drink. But then Garrett, a rough drifter with dead eyes, ran out of money at the poker table. With the whole room watching, he said, "I've still got something to wager, a woman outside in my wagon." The room went cold. Even in the rough frontier, trading people like livestock crossed the line. But Dalton, the richest rancher in the territory, just leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Bring her in," he said. When Garrett dragged her inside, the saloon erupted in whispers. The woman looked like a ghost. Dirt smeared her skin, her dress torn, her wrists loosely tied with rope. She didn't look at anyone. Her eyes stayed on the floor as if she already knew no one there would help her. Dalton studied her like a man checking a mare's teeth. "Not worth much," he said. "Hold your hand." But Garrett wasn't letting go. "Someone here wants her. Someone's got a use for her." No one moved. No one spoke. The woman's shoulders tightened like she was shrinking herself smaller, waiting for the world to decide her fate. Caleb felt something rise in him, a quiet anger he hadn't felt in years. That woman didn't belong to any of them, and she shouldn't be standing there like something to be won or lost. Then he heard himself say it. "I'll take the hand." The room erupted. Some laughed, some cursed. Dalton raised an eyebrow, amused. "Stone, that's the worst bargain you'll ever make." Caleb ignored them all. The cards were dealt. Garrett was desperate, sloppy. Caleb didn't care about the game, but when the final cards hit the table, his pair of kings beat Garrett's tens. Just like that, the room declared him a fool. But the woman finally lifted her eyes to his. He walked to Garrett. "Give me the rope." Garrett jerked it loose with rough hands and stormed out, already hunting for another drink. The crowd lost interest fast. To them, the show was over. Caleb was left standing with the woman everyone claimed wasn't worth a penny. "What's your name?" he asked gently. A long pause. Her voice came out weak, strained by fear and months of silence. "Eleanor." "I'm Caleb Stone," he said. "I have a homestead up in the mountains. It's simple, but you'll be safe there. That's all I can promise." She didn't answer. She didn't trust him, but she didn't run either. Outside, the night was cold. Caleb took off his coat and draped it around her shoulders. She stiffened at first, as if she expected pain instead of kindness, but she didn't pull away. He lifted her onto his horse and climbed up behind her, holding the reins while she sat tense and uncertain. They rode under a sky full of stars. The wind bit at them, but Caleb didn't rush. He kept the horse steady, careful. After a while, Eleanor's breathing eased. Her fear didn't vanish, but exhaustion finally pulled her body into rest against him. When they reached the cabin, Caleb lit a lamp and opened the small bedroom door. "You can sleep here," he said softly. "The bed is warm. I'll be out here if you need anything. No harm will come to you under my roof." Eleanor stepped inside slowly, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the small fireplace, the handmade quilt, the quiet safety. She turned back toward him. "Why?" she whispered. Caleb swallowed, because it was the right thing to do. She studied him a long moment, searching for deception. Finding none, she nodded once and closed the door. Caleb sat at the kitchen table long after she fell asleep. He stared at the cold mountain outside his window and wondered what he had just brought into his life. He didn't know her story. He didn't know her fears. He didn't know if she would stay or if she even trusted him enough to try. But when dawn came and he glanced through the window, something shocked him to his core. Eleanor was already outside, kneeling in the frost-touched soil, her hands moving through the earth with a strange tenderness, as if she understood it in ways he never had, and everything in his world began to change. The frost was still on the ground when Caleb stepped outside, unsure of what he was seeing. Eleanor knelt in the cold soil, her dress damp at the hem, her hands sifting the earth with a focus so sharp it startled him. She didn't look afraid anymore. She didn't look beaten. She looked alive. "Eleanor," he said gently. She looked up in the morning light. Her eyes seemed different, clear, alert, almost hungry for something she hadn't felt in a long time. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I should have asked permission." "Permission for what?" Caleb asked. She hesitated, then pointed to the dirt. "To examine your soil." He blinked. Soil? Of all the things he expected her to say, that wasn't one of them. What about the soil? She spoke slowly at first, as if testing her voice, then with a growing confidence. "It's too alkaline. That's why your crops struggle. But the clay content is good, and the mineral profile is better than it looks. You have potential here, Caleb, a lot of it. You're just planting the wrong things in the wrong way." Caleb stared at her. Nobody in the territory talked like that, not even the farmers who'd been working the land their whole lives. "How do you know all that?" he asked. For the first time since he met her, she lifted her chin without fear. "My father was Professor Edmund Hartwell," she said, "a botanist. He studied frontier soil for 20 years. I traveled with him everywhere. He taught me everything: soil chemistry, companion planting, seed preservation. It was our life." Her voice cracked on the last word. "He died 6 months ago," she whispered. "After that, I had no one." Caleb felt something twist inside him. She had been dragged through hell, treated as property, her knowledge ignored. But now, standing in the morning frost, she looked like someone remembering who she used to be. She reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside were seeds, strange, rare, carefully wrapped. "My father's collection," she said softly. "Hardy varieties he gathered from everywhere. They can grow where others fail. If you let me, I can plant them and I can help you change this land." Caleb didn't even need to think. "It's your home now," he said. "You don't need permission." Something in her face softened for the first time. Not fully, but enough. They spent the morning planting in ways Caleb had never seen. Instead of straight rows, Eleanor set circular beds. She placed certain seeds together, explaining how some plants protected others, how some pulled nutrients up, how others shaded the soil so moisture wouldn't vanish. Caleb followed her instructions, not questioning, watching the quiet fire come back into her eyes as she worked. By midday, 3 large beds were planted, each one a careful pattern of life. "How long before anything grows?" he asked. "A week if the weather holds," she said. "And by harvest, you won't recognize this place." For the first time in years, Caleb felt something he didn't dare feel before: hope. After noon, he saddled his horse and rode to town. Eleanor stayed behind, still working the soil like someone trying to breathe again after months underwater. Caleb needed to get her clothes, food, and proper supplies. And maybe he needed time to understand the strange blessing that had walked into his life. When he stepped into the general store, Mrs. Henderson, behind the counter, nearly dropped her spectacles. "Caleb Stone," she said, "is it true you want a woman in a card game?" Caleb felt heat rise to his face. "I helped someone who needed help," he said firmly. Mrs. Henderson studied him a long moment, then softened. "You're a good man, but folks are talking. If that girl needs women things, clothes, help, you send her to me. No woman should be alone up there." Caleb nodded gratefully. When he returned to the homestead that evening, Eleanor was still in the field, dirt covering her hands, sweat on her brow, but standing with a quiet pride he'd never seen before. She looked more like herself, whoever she truly was. "I brought you some things," Caleb said. Her hands shook slightly when she opened the packages. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes," he said, "I did." That night they shared stew at the small table. Eleanor ate slowly at first, then with growing hunger. She told him about her father's journals, the methods he'd taught her, the dream he'd had of creating a guide that settlers could use to survive harsh land. "Baby," Caleb said softly, "you could finish his work here safely." Her eyes widened. "You would let me?" "It's your home," he said. "Do whatever you need." For the first time she smiled, a small, fragile smile, but a real one. And the cabin, which had felt empty for 7 long years, warmed gently around them. But peace never lasted long on the frontier. A few nights later, a rider thundered toward the homestead. It was Mr. Paulson from the settlement. He swung off his horse, breathless. "Caleb, Eleanor, you should know. Dalton's been asking questions. He learned who Eleanor's father was. He thinks her knowledge is valuable. He's spreading rumors. He wants her to work for him, and he doesn't take no easily." Eleanor's face drained of color. Caleb stepped between her and Paulson instinctively. "He's not taking her." Paulson swallowed. "He's got influence. He's talking to officials. You two need to be careful." After he rode away, Eleanor sat trembling at the table. "He won't stop," she whispered. "Men like Dalton never stop." Caleb knelt beside her chair. "You're safe here," he said. "I'll protect you, whatever it takes." But even as he said the words, he felt the truth settle heavy in his chest. A storm was coming. A powerful man wanted what Eleanor knew, and he would not give up without a fight. The storm arrived faster than either of them expected. 2 weeks later, while Caleb and Eleanor were selling produce in the settlement, the entire town went silent. A wagon rolled in carrying Territorial Judge Blackwood, and beside him, wearing fine clothes and a smile that hit a knife, sat Thomas Dalton. People stepped back as the judge entered the meeting hall. Caleb and Eleanor followed with pounding hearts. The air felt tight enough to choke on. "Mr. and Mrs. Stone," the judge said, "a legal matter has been brought concerning your marriage and Mrs. Stone's status." Caleb stood straight. "Our marriage is legal. We have nothing to answer for." Dalton rose with papers in hand. "Your Honor, I present documented proof that the woman known as Eleanor Stone was sold to me 2 weeks before the poker game in which Caleb Stone acquired her. Garrett stole what was already mine." Gasps filled the room. Eleanor shook her head, her voice shaking. "That never happened. He forged those papers." Dalton shrugged. "I have notarized signatures and witnesses." The judge studied the documents with a troubled look. "These appear legitimate." Eleanor's knees weakened. Caleb caught her before she fell. "She's my wife," Caleb said. "You can't take her." Dalton's voice dripped with false sympathy. "Protective custody? That's all I'm requesting until a full hearing in the Capitol." Eleanor's fear snapped into fury. "Protective custody means you take me, force me to work for you. You're trying to turn me into property again." Mrs. Henderson stood up suddenly. "Judge, this is wrong. Eleanor Stone is no man's property. She belongs to this community." One by one, people rose. Mr. Paulson, the schoolteacher's wife, farmers Eleanor had helped. Their voices filled the room, but the judge still shook his head. "A hearing in 30 days, he said. "Until then, the situation remains under review." Dalton smiled because he knew the next 30 days were his battlefield, and he played dirty. At home that night, Eleanor trembled in Caleb's arms. "He'll take me," she whispered. "He'll find a way." "No," Caleb said. "I'll die before I let that happen." She looked up at him, tears shining. "Then we have to fight. We need proof, real proof." Caleb nodded, jaw tight. "I'll find it." That next morning, he rode down the mountain determined to uncover Dalton's lies. For days, he questioned people, searched for cracks in Dalton's story. Then he made a dangerous decision. He snuck onto Dalton's ranch property at night. Inside Dalton's office, by the thin moonlight, he found ledgers, forged drafts, notes detailing how Dalton pressured families into giving up their land. He photographed everything with a small camera a neighbor had lent him. But just as he reached the window to escape, Dalton's hired men burst inside. Caleb fought like a cornered wolf. He took 2 down, but the third slammed a club across his ribs. Pain ripped through him. He crashed through the window, rolled, mounted his horse, and fled into the dark with bullets singing past his head. He reached the homestead at dawn, bloody and barely conscious. Eleanor ran to him, screaming his name, her hands shaking as she pulled him inside. "Caleb, what did you do?" she cried. "I got proof," he gasped. "Real proof." That afternoon, 6 armed men, Dalton's men, took positions on the distant ridge, watching the homestead like wolves circling prey. But they weren't the only ones coming. By sunset, Mrs. Henderson arrived with a wagon full of women. Behind her came Mr. Polson and a line of farmers with rifles. By nightfall, the homestead was surrounded, not by Dalton's men, but by friends, by people Eleanor had helped. "We're not letting Dalton take either of you," Mrs. Henderson said. 5 days before the hearing, the federal territorial marshal arrived, a tall, weathered man named Clayton. He studied Caleb's photographs and Dalton's forged papers. He questioned witnesses. He had a handwriting expert examine the documents. "These are forgeries," the expert confirmed. "Sloppy ones." Marshal Clayton nodded. "Dalton isn't just coming after you. He's been running this scheme for years." A new fire lit in Eleanor's eyes. "So what happens now, she asked. "We let him walk into that hearing," Clayton said, "and then we arrest him in front of everyone." The courthouse was packed on the day of the hearing. Dalton strutted in confidence, smiling at Eleanor like he already owned her future. 5 minutes later, his smile died. Marshal Clayton stood. "Your Honor, we present evidence of widespread fraud, forgery, and land theft committed by Thomas Dalton." Dalton lunged for Eleanor in a final act of rage. "You should have been mine. You will not defy me." He drew a pistol. Caleb moved without thinking. One shot echoed through the courtroom. Caleb staggered and fell, blood spreading across his shoulder. Before Dalton could fire again, deputies swarmed him and slammed him to the floor. He screamed and fought, but the iron cuffs clicked shut. Dalton's empire collapsed in a single afternoon. Judge Blackwood cleared his throat. "Mrs. Stone, I owe you an apology. Your marriage stands, your freedom stands, and justice will be done." Eleanor knelt beside Caleb, crying as she held pressure on his wound. "You protected me," she whispered. "Always," he breathed. Caleb survived. Dalton did not. He spent the next decade behind bars. His land returned to the families he stole it from. Eleanor and Caleb returned home to their mountain with a peace so deep it felt like a second sunrise. And that summer, something even more miraculous happened. Eleanor placed Caleb's hand on her growing belly and said, "Our baby is strong." Caleb closed his eyes, tears sliding down his face. 7 years of grief melted under her touch. The once barren land around them had become rich with life, and so had their home. One night, as they stood in the field where she first touched the soil, Caleb whispered, "They laughed when I won you that night, called you worthless." Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder. "I know what they called me," she said softly, "but you saw who I really was." Caleb wrapped his arm around her, careful and full of awe. "You weren't my worst bargain," he said. "You were the blessing I didn't know how to pray for under the Montana stars." As the wind moved gently across the fields they built together, their future stretched out bright and certain. A new life was growing, a new legacy had begun, and the woman the world had called worthless had turned one broken mountain man into the richest soul in the territory.